Down the long concourse they came unsteadily, Enid favoring her damaged hip, Alfred paddling at the air with loose hinged hands and slapping the airport carpeting with poorly controlled feet, both of them carrying Nordic Pleasure Line's shoulder bags and concentrating on the floor in front of them, measuring out the hazardous distance 3 paces at a time. To anyone who saw them averting their eyes from the dark haired New Yorkers careering past them, to anyone who caught a glimpse of Alfred's straw fedora looming at the height of Iowa corn on Labor Day, or the yellow wool of the slacks stretching over Enid's outslung hip, it was obvious that they were Midwestern and intimidated. But to Chris Lambert, who was waiting for them just beyond the security checkpoint, they were killers. Chip had crossed his arms defensively and raised one hand to pull on the wrought iron rivet in his ear. He worried that he might tear the rivet right out of his earlobe, that the maximum pain his ear's nerves could generate was less pain than he needed now to steady himself. From his station by the metal detectors, he watched an azure-haired girl overtake his parents, an azure-haired girl of college age, a very wantable stranger with pierced lips and eyebrows. It struck him that if he could have sex with this girl for 1 second, he could face his parents confidently, and that if he could keep on having sex with this girl once every minute for as long as his parents were in town, he could survive their entire visit. Chip was a tall, gym-built man with crow's feet and sparse, butter-yellow hair. If the girl had noticed him, she might have thought he was a little too old for the leather he was wearing. As she hurried past him, he pulled harder on his rivet to offset the pain of her departure from his life forever and to focus his attention on his father, whose face was brightening at the discovery of a son among so many strangers. In the lunging manner of a man floundering in water, Alfred fell upon Chip and grabbed Chip's hand and wrist as if they were a rope he'd been thrown. "Well," he said. "Well." Enid came limping up behind him. "Chip," she cried, "what have you done to your ears?" "Dad, Mom," Chip murmured through his teeth, hoping the azure-haired girl was out of earshot. "Good to see you." He had time for one subversive thought about his parents' Nordic Pleasure Line's shoulder bag. Either Nordic Pleasure Lines sent bags like these to every booker of its cruises as a cynical means of getting inexpensive walkabout publicity, or as a practical means of tagging the cruise participants for greater ease of handling at embarkation points, or as a benign means of building esprit de corps, or else Enid and Alfred had deliberately saved the bags from some previous Nordic Pleasure Lines cruise and, out of a misguided sense of loyalty, had chosen to carry them on their upcoming cruise as well, and in either case, Chip was appalled by his parents' willingness to make themselves vectors of corporate advertising. Before he shouldered the bags himself and assumed the burden of seeing LaGuardia Airport and New York City and his life and clothes and body through the disappointed eyes of his parents. He noticed, as if for the first time, the dirty linoleum, the assassin-like chauffeurs holding up signs with other people's names on them, the snarl of wires dangling from a hole in the ceiling. He distinctly heard the word motherfucker. Outside the big windows on the baggage level, 2 Bangladeshi men were pushing a disabled cab through rain and angry honking. "We have to be at the pier by 4, Enid said to Chip, "and I think Dad was hoping to see your desk at the Wall Street Journal." She raised her voice. "Al? Al?" Though stooped in the neck now, Alfred was still an imposing figure. His hair was white and thick and sleek, like a polar bear's, and the powerful, long muscles of his shoulders, which Chip remembered laboring in the spanking of a child, usually Chip himself, still filled the gray tweed shoulders of his sports coat. "Al, didn't you say you wanted to see where Chip worked?" Enid shouted. Alfred shook his head. "There's no time." The baggage carousel circulated nothing. "Did you take your pill?" Enid said. "Yes," Alfred said. He closed his eyes and repeated slowly, "I took my pill. I took my pill. I took my pill." "Dr. Hedgepeth has him on a new medication," Enid explained to Chip, who was quite certain that his father had not, in fact, expressed interest in seeing his office. And since Chip had no association with the Wall Street Journal, the publication to which he made unpaid contributions was the Warren Street Journal, a monthly of transgressive arts. He'd also very recently completed a screenplay, and he'd been working part-time as a legal proofreader at Bragg, Neuter and Spey for the nearly 2 years since he'd lost his assistant professorship in Renaissance Studies and Critical Theory at C College in Connecticut as a result of an offense involving a female undergraduate, which had fallen just short of the legally actionable, and which, though his parents never learned of it, had interrupted the parade of accomplishments that his mother could brag about back home in St. Jude. He told his parents that he'd quit teaching in order to pursue a career in writing, and when, more recently, his mother had pressed him for details, he'd mentioned the Warren Street Journal, the name of which his mother had misheard, and instantly begun to trumpet to her friends Esther Root and Bay Meisner, and Mary Beth Schumpert. And though Chip, in his monthly phone calls home, had had many opportunities to disabuse her, he'd instead actively fostered the misunderstanding. And here things became rather complex, not only because the Wall Street Journal was available in St. Jude, and his mother had never mentioned looking for his work and failing to find it, meaning that some part of her knew perfectly well that he didn't write for the paper, but also because the author of articles like Consensual Incest and Self/Abuse was conspiring to preserve in his mother precisely the kind of illusion that the Warren Street Journal was dedicated to exploding. And he was 39 years old, and he blamed his parents for the person he had become. He was happy when his mother let the subject drop. His tremor's much better, Enid added in a voice inaudible to Alfred. The only side effect is the way he may hallucinate. That's quite a side effect, Chip said. Dr. Hedgepeth says that what he has is very mild and almost completely controllable with medication. Alfred was surveying the baggage claim cavern while pale travelers angled for position at the carousel. There was a confusion of tread patterns on the linoleum, gray with the pollutants that the rain had brought down. The light was the color of car sickness. New York City, Alfred said. Enid frowned at Chip's pants. Those aren't leather, are they? Yes. How do you wash them? They're leather. They're like a second skin. We have to be at the pier no later than 4 o'clock, Enid said. The carousel coughed up some suitcases. Chip, help me, his father said. Soon Chip was staggering out into the wind-blown rain with all 4 of his parents' bags. Alfred shuffled after him with the jerking momentum of a man who knew there would be trouble if he had to stop and start again. Enid lagged behind, intent on the pain in her hip. She'd put on weight and maybe lost a little height since Chip had last seen her. She'd always been a pretty woman, but to Chip, she was so much a personality and so little anything else that even staring straight at her, he had no idea what she really looked like. What's that, wrought iron? Alfred asked him as the taxi line crept forward. Yes, Chip said, touching his ear. Looks like an old 1/4-inch rivet. Yes. What do you do? Crimp that? Hammer it? It's hammered, Chip said. Alfred winced and gave a low, inhaling whistle. We're doing a luxury fall color cruise, Enid said when the 3 of them were in a yellow cab, speeding through Queens. We sail up to Quebec, and then we enjoy the changing leaves all the way back down to Newport. Dad so enjoyed the last cruise we were on. Didn't you, Al? Didn't you have a good time on that cruise? The brick palisades of the East River waterfront were taking an angry beating from the rain. Chip could have wished for a sunny day, a clear view of landmarks and blue water, with nothing to hide. The only colors on the road this morning were the smeared reds of brake lights. This is one of the great cities of the world, Alfred said with emotion. How are you feeling these days, Dad? Chip managed to ask. Any better, I'd be in heaven. Any worse, I'd be in hell. We're excited about your new job, Enid said. One of the great papers in the country, Alfred said. The Wall Street Journal. Does anybody smell fish, though? We're near the ocean, Chip said. No, it's you. Enid leaned and buried her face in Chip's leather jacket. Your jacket smells strongly of fish. He wrenched free of her. Mother, please. Chip's problem was a loss of confidence. Gone were the days when he could afford to épater les bourgeois, except for his Manhattan apartment and his handsome girlfriend, Julia Verret. He now had almost nothing to persuade himself that he was a functioning male with those of his sister, Denise, who at the age of 32 was the executive chef and co-owner of a large, new high-end restaurant in Philadelphia. Chip had hoped he might have sold his screenplay by now, but he hadn't finished a draft until after midnight on Tuesday, and then he'd had to work 3 14-hour shifts at Bragg, Neuter, and Spey to raise cash to pay his August rent and reassure his landlord about his September and October rent. And then there was a lunch to be shopped for and an apartment to be cleaned, and finally, sometime before dawn this morning, a long-hoarded Xanax to be swallowed. Meanwhile, nearly a week had gone by without his seeing Julia or speaking to her directly. In response to the many nervous messages he'd left on her voicemail in the last 48 hours, asking her to meet him and his parents and Denise at his apartment at noon on Saturday, and also, please, if possible, not to mention to his parents that she was married to someone else, Julia had maintained a total phone and email silence from which even a more stable man than Chip might have drawn disturbing conclusions. It was raining so hard in Manhattan that water was streaming down facades and frothing at the mouths of sewers. Outside his building, on East 9th Street, Chip took money from Enid and handed it through the cab's partition. And even as the turbaned driver thanked him, he realized the tip was too small. From his own wallet, he took 2 singles and dangled them near the driver's shoulder. That's enough, Enid squeaked, reaching for Chip's wrist. He already said thank you. But the money was gone. Alfred was trying to open the door by pulling on the window crank. Here, Dad, it's this one, Chip said, and leaned across him to pop the door. How big a tip was that? Enid asked Chip on the sidewalk, under his building's marquee as the driver heaved luggage from the trunk. About 15%, Chip said. More like 20, I'd say, Enid said. Let's have a fight about this, why don't we? 20%'s too much, Chip, Alfred pronounced in a booming voice. It's not reasonable. You all have a good day now, the taxi driver said with no apparent irony. A tip is for service and comportment, Enid said. If the service and comportment are especially good, I might give 15%. But if you automatically tip, I've suffered from depression all my life, Alfred said, or seemed to say. Excuse me, Chip said. Depression years changed me. They changed the meaning of a dollar. An economic depression we're talking about. Then, when the service really is especially good or especially bad, Enid pursued. There's no way to express it monetarily. A dollar is still a lot of money, Alfred said. 15% if the service is exceptional, really exceptional. I'm wondering why we're having this particular conversation, Chip said to his mother. Why this conversation and not some other conversation? We're both terribly anxious, Enid replied, to see where you work. Chip's doorman, Zoroaster, hurried out to help with the luggage and installed the Lamberts in the building's bulky elevator. Enid said, I ran into your old friend, Dean Driblet, at the bank the other day. I never run into Dean, but where he doesn't ask about you. He was impressed with your new writing job. Dean Driblet was a classmate, not a friend, Chip said. He and his wife just had their 4th child. I told you, didn't I? They built that enormous house out in Paradise Valley. Al, didn't you count 8 bedrooms? Alfred gave her a steady, unblinking look. Chip leaned on the door close button. Dean's mother, Honey, and I are good friends, you know, Enid said. And Dad and I were at the housewarming in June. It was spectacular. They'd had it catered, and they had pyramids of shrimp. It was solid shrimp in pyramids. I've never seen anything like it. Pyramids of shrimp, Chip said. The elevator door finally closed. Anyways, it's a beautiful house, Enid said. There are at least 6 bedrooms, and, you know, it looks like they're going to fill them. Dean's tremendously successful. He started that lawn care business when he decided the mortuary business wasn't for him. Well, you know, Dale Driblet's his stepdad. You know, the Driblet Chapel. And now his billboards are everywhere, and he started an HMO I saw in the paper, where it's the fastest growing HMO in St. Jude. It's called DD Care, same as the lawn care business, and there are billboards for the HMO now, too. He's quite the entrepreneur, I'd say. Slow elevator, Alfred said. This is a pre-war building, Chip explained in a tight voice. An extremely desirable building. But you know what he told me he's doing for his mother's birthday? It's still a surprise for her, but I can tell you. He's taking her to Paris for 8 days, 2 first-class tickets, 8 nights at the Ritz. That's the kind of person Dean is, very family-oriented. But can you believe that kind of birthday present? Al, didn't you say the house alone probably cost $1 million? Al? It's a large house, but cheaply done, Alfred said, with sudden vigor. The walls are like paper. All the new houses are like that, Enid said. You asked me if I was impressed with the house. I thought it was ostentatious. I thought the shrimp was ostentatious. It was poor. It may have been frozen, Enid said. People are easily impressed with things like that, Alfred said. They'll talk for months about the pyramids of shrimp. Well, see for yourself, he said to Chip, as to a neutral bystander. Your mother's still talking about it. For a moment, Chip was tempted to believe that his father had become a likable old stranger, but he knew Alfred, underneath, to be a shouter and a punisher. The last time Chip had visited his parents in St. Jude, 4 years earlier, he'd taken along his then-girlfriend Ruthie, a peroxided young Marxist from the north of England, who, after committing numberless offenses against Enid's sensibilities, she lit a cigarette indoors, laughed out loud at Enid's favorite watercolors of Buckingham Palace, came to dinner without a bra, and failed to take even one bite of the salad of water chestnuts and green peas and cheddar cheese cubes in a thick mayonnaise sauce, which Enid made for festive occasions, had needled and baited Alfred until he pronounced that the blacks would be the ruination of this country. The blacks were incapable of coexisting with whites. They expected the government to take care of them. They didn't know the meaning of hard work. What they lacked above all was discipline. It was going to end with slaughter in the streets, and he didn't give a damn what Ruthie thought of him. She was a visitor in his house and his country, and she had no right to criticize things she didn't understand. Whereupon Chip, who'd already warned Ruthie that his parents were the squarest people in America, had smiled at her as if to say, you see, exactly as advertised. Coincidentally or not, Ruth had dumped him 2 weeks later. Al, Enid said as the elevator lurched to a halt, you have to admit that it was a very, very nice party, and that it was very nice of Dean to invite us. Alfred seemed not to have heard her. Propped outside Chip's apartment was a clear plastic umbrella that Chip recognized with relief as Julia Vraze's. He was herding the parental luggage from the elevator when his apartment door swung open and Julie herself stepped out. Oh, she said, as though flustered. You're early. By Chip's watch, it was 11:35. Julie was wearing a shapeless lavender raincoat and holding a DreamWorks tote bag. Her hair, which was long and the color of dark chocolate, was big with humidity and rain. In the tone of a person being friendly to large animals, she said, "Hi" to Alfred and "Hi" separately to Enid. Alfred and Enid bayed their names at her and extended hands to shake, driving her back into the apartment, where Enid began to pepper her with questions in which Chip, as he followed with the luggage, could hear subtexts and agendas. Do you live in the city? Enid said. You're not cohabiting with our son, are you? And you work in the city, too? You are gainfully employed? You're not from an alien, snobbish, moneyed Eastern family? Did you grow up here? Or do you come from a trans-Appalachian state where people are warm-hearted and down-to-earth and unlikely to be Jewish? Oh, and do you still have family in Ohio? Have your parents, perhaps, taken the morally dubious modern step of getting divorced? Do you have brothers or sisters? Are you a spoiled only child or a Catholic with a zillion siblings? Julie having passed this initial examination, Enid turned her attention to the apartment. Chip, in a late crisis of confidence, had bought a stain removal kit and lifted the big semen stain off the red chaise lounge, dismantled the wall of wine bottle corks with which he'd been bricking in the niche above his fireplace at a rate of half a dozen Merlots and Pinot Grigios a week. Taken down from his bathroom wall the photographs of semi-erect penises, which were the flower of his art collection, and replaced them with the 3 diplomas that Enid had long ago insisted on having framed for him. This is about the size of Dean Driblet's bathroom, Enid said. Wouldn't you say, Al? Alfred rotated his bobbing hands and examined their dorsal sides. I'd never seen such an enormous bathroom. Enid, you have no tact, Alfred said. It might have occurred to Chip that this, too, was a tactless remark, since it implied that his father concurred in his mother's criticism of the apartment and objected only to her airing of it. But Chip was unable to focus on anything but the hairdryer protruding from Julia's DreamWorks tote bag. It was the hairdryer that she kept in his bathroom. She seemed, actually, to be heading out the door. Dean and Trish have a whirlpool and a shower stall and a tub, all separate, Enid went on. The sinks are his and hers. Chip, I'm sorry, Julia said. He raised a hand to put her on hold. We're going to have lunch here as soon as Denise comes, he announced to his parents. It's a very simple lunch. Just make yourselves at home. It was nice to meet you both, Julia called to Enid and Alfred. To Chip, in a lower voice, she said, Denise will be here. You'll be fine. She opened the door. Mom, Dad, Chip said. Just 1 second. He followed Julia out of the apartment and let the door fall shut behind him. This is really unfortunate timing, he said. Just really, really unfortunate. Julia shook her hair back off her temples. I'm feeling good about the fact that it's the first time in my life I've ever acted self-interestedly in a relationship. That's nice. That's a big step. Chip made an effort to smile. But what about the script? Is Eden reading it? I think maybe this weekend sometime. What about you? I read, Julie looked away. Most of it. My idea, Chip said, was to have this hump that the moviegoer has to get over, putting something off-putting at the beginning. It's a classic, modernist strategy. There's a lot of rich suspense toward the end. Julia turned toward the elevator and didn't reply. Did you get to the end yet? Chip asked. Oh, Chip, she burst out miserably. Your script starts off with a 6-page lecture about anxieties of the phallus in Tudor drama. He was aware of this. Indeed, for weeks now, he'd been awakening most nights before dawn, his stomach churning and his teeth clenched, and had wrestled with the nightmare certainty that a long academic monologue Tudor drama had no place in Act 1 of a commercial script. Often it took him hours, took getting out of bed, pacing around, drinking vodka, to regain his conviction that a theory-driven opening monologue was not only not a mistake, but the script's most powerful selling point. And now, with a single glance at Julia, he could see that he was wrong. Nodding in heartfelt agreement with her criticism, he opened the door of his apartment and called to his parents. 1 second, Mom, Dad, just 1 second. As he shut the door again, however, the old arguments came back to him. You see, though, he said, the entire story is prefigured in that monologue. Every single theme is there in capsule form. Gender, power, identity, authenticity. And the thing is, wait, Julia? Bowing her head sheepishly, as though she'd somehow hoped he wouldn't notice she was leaving, Julia turned away from the elevator and back toward him. The thing is, he said, the girl's sitting in the front row of the classroom listening to the lecture. The fact that he is controlling the discourse. And it's a little creepy, though, Julia said, the way you keep talking about her breasts. This, too, was true. That it was true, however, seemed unfair and cruel to Chip, who would never have had the heart to write the script at all. without the lure of imagining the breasts of his young female lead. You're probably right, he said, although some of the physicality there is intentional, because that's the irony, see, that she's attracted to his mind while he's attracted to her. But for a woman reading it, Julie said obstinately, it's sort of like the poultry department. Breast, 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 thigh, leg. I can remove some of those references, Chip said in a low voice. I can also shorten the opening lecture. The thing is, though, I want there to be a hump. Right, for the moviegoer to get over. That's a neat idea. Please come and have lunch. Please, Julia. The elevator door had opened at her touch. I'm saying it's a tiny bit insulting to a person somehow. But that's not you. It's not even based on you. Oh, great. It's somebody else's breasts. Jesus, please, 1 second. Chip turned back to his apartment door and opened it, and this time he was startled to find himself face to face with his father. Alfred's big hands were shaking violently. Dad, hi. Just another minute here. Chip, Alfred said. Ask her to stay. Tell her you want her to stay. Chip nodded and closed the door in the old man's face, but in the few seconds that his back had been turned, the elevator swallowed Julia. He punched the call button to no avail, and then opened the fire door and ran down the spiral of the service stairwell. After a series of effulgent lectures celebrating the unfettered pursuit of pleasure as a strategy of subverting the bureaucracy of rationalism, Bill Quaintance, an attractive young professor of Renaissance studies and critical theory, is seduced by his beautiful and adoring student, Mona. Their wildly erotic affair has hardly begun, however, when they are discovered by Bill's estranged wife, Hilaire. In a tense confrontation representing the clash of therapeutic and transgressive worldviews, Bill and Hilaire struggle for the soul of young Mona, who lies naked between them on tangled sheets. Hilaire succeeds in seducing Mona with her crypto-repressive rhetoric, and Mona publicly denounces Bill. Bill loses his job, but soon discovers email records proving that Hilaire has given Mona money to ruin his career. As Bill is driving to see his lawyer with a diskette containing the incriminating evidence, his car is run off the road into the raging Sea River, and the diskette floats free of the sunken car and is borne by ceaseless, indomitable currents into the raging, erotic/chaotic open sea, and the crash is ruled vehicular suicide, and in the film's final scenes, Hilaire is hired to replace Bill on the faculty and is seen lecturing on the evils of unfettered pleasure to a classroom in which is seated her diabolical lesbian lover, Mona. This was the one-page précis that Chip had assembled with the aid of store-bought screenwriting manuals and had faxed one winter morning to a Manhattan-based film producer named Eden Procuro. 5 minutes later, he'd answered his phone to the cool, blank voice of a young woman saying, "Please hold for Eden Procuro," followed by Eden Procuro herself crying, "I love it, love it, love it, love it, love it." But now, a year and a half had passed. Now the one-page précis had become a 124-page script called The Academy Purple. Now Julia Vraise, the chocolate-haired owner of that cool, blank personal assistant's voice, was running away from him, and as he raced downstairs to intercept her, planting his feet sidewise to take the steps 3 and 4 at a time, grabbing the newel at each landing and reversing his trajectory with a jerk, all he could see or think of was a damning entry in his nearly photographic mental concordance of those 124 pages. 3. Bee-stung lips, high round breasts, narrow hips, and 3. Over the cashmere sweater that snugly hugs her breasts. 4. Forward rapidly, her perfect adolescent breasts eagerly. 8. Eyeing her breasts. 9. Eyeing her breasts. 9. His eyes draw helplessly to her perfect breasts. 11. Eyeing her breasts. 12. Mentally fondling her perfect breasts. 15. Eyeing and eyeing her perfect adolescent breasts. 23. Clinch her perfect breasts surging against his. 24. The repressive bra to unfetter her subversive breasts. 28. To pinkly tongue one sweat-sheened breast. 29. Phallically jutting nipple of her sweat-drenched breast. 29. I like your breasts. 30. Absolutely adore your honeyed, heavy breasts. 33. Hilaire's breasts, like twin Gestapo bullets, can be. 36. Barbed glare as if to puncture and deflate her breasts. 44. Arcadian breasts with stern, puritanical terry cloth. And 45. Cowering, ashamed, the towel clutched to her breasts. 76. Her guileless breasts shrouded now in militaristic. 83. I missed your mouth. I missed your perfect breasts. 117. Drowned headlights fading like two milk-white breasts. And there were probably even more. More than he could remember. And the only two readers who mattered now were women. It seemed to Chip that Julia was leaving him because The Academy Purple had too many breast references and a draggy opening. and that if he could correct these few obvious problems, both on Julia's copy of the script and, more important, on the copy he'd specially laser printed on 24-pound ivory bond paper for Eden Procuro, there might be hope not only for his finances, but also for his chances of ever again unfettering and fondling Julia's own guileless, milk-white breasts, which by this point in the day, as by late morning of almost every day in recent months, was one of the last activities on earth in which he could still reasonably expect to take solace for his failures. Exiting the stairwell into the lobby, he found the elevator waiting to torment its next rider. Through the open street door, he saw a taxi extinguish its roof light and pull away. Zoroaster was mopping up inblown water from the lobby's checkerboard marble. "Goodbye, Mr. Chip," he quipped, by no means for the first time, as Chip ran outside. Through the bread curtain of water coming off the marquee, he saw Julia's cab brake for a yellow light. Directly across the street, another cab had stopped to discharge a passenger, and it occurred to Chip that he could take this other cab and ask the driver to follow Julia. The idea was tempting, but there were difficulties. One difficulty was that by chasing Julia, he would arguably be committing the worst of the offenses for which the General Counsel of C College, in a shrill, moralistic lawyer's letter, had once upon a time threatened to countersue him or have him prosecuted. The alleged offenses had included fraud, breach of contract, kidnap, Title IX sexual harassment, serving liquor to a student under the legal drinking age, and possession and sale of a controlled substance. But it was the accusation of stalking, of making obscene and threatening and abusive telephone calls and trespassing with intent to violate a young woman's privacy that had really scared Chip and scared him still. A more immediate difficulty was that he had $4 in his wallet, less than $10 in his checking account. No credit to speak of on any of his major credit cards, and no prospect of further proofreading work until Monday afternoon. Considering that the last time he'd seen Julia 6 days ago, she'd specifically complained that he always wanted to stay home and eat pasta and always be kissing her and having sex. She'd said that sometimes she almost felt like he used sex as a kind of medication, and that maybe the reason he didn't just go ahead and self-medicate with crack or heroin instead was that sex was free and he was turning into such a cheapsteak. She'd said that now that she was taking an actual prescription medication herself, she sometimes felt like she was taking it for both of them, and that this seemed doubly unfair, because she was the one who paid for the medication, and because the medication made her slightly less interested in sex than she used to be. She'd said that if it were up to Chip, they probably wouldn't even go to movies anymore, but would spend the whole weekend wallowing in bed with the shades down and then reheating pasta. He suspected that the minimum price of further conversation with her would be an overpriced lunch of mesquite-grilled autumn vegetables and a bottle of Sancerre, for which he had no conceivable way of paying. And so he stood and did nothing as the corner traffic light turned green and Julia's cab drove out of sight. Rain was lashing the pavement in white, infected-looking drops. Across the street, a long-legged woman in tight jeans and excellent black boots had climbed out of the other cab. That this woman was Chip's little sister, Denise. That is, was the only attractive young woman on the planet whom he was neither permitted nor inclined to feast his eyes on and imagine having sex with, seemed to him just the latest unfairness in a long morning of unfairness. Denise picked her way through the pools and rapids on the pavement and joined Chip beneath the marquee. "Listen," Chip said with a nervous smile, not looking at her. "I need to ask you a big favor. I need you to hold the fort for me here while I find Eden and get my script back. There's a major, quick set of corrections I have to make." As if he were a caddy or a servant, Denise handed him her umbrella and brushed water and grit from the ankles of her jeans. Denise was the one who'd instructed him to invite his parents to stop and have lunch in New York today. She'd sounded like the World Bank dictating terms to a Latin debtor state, because unfortunately Chip owed her some money. He owed her whatever $10,000 and $5,500 and $4,000 and $1,000 added up to. "See," he explained, "Eden wants to read the script this afternoon sometime, and financially, obviously, it's critical that we—" "You can't leave now," Denise said. "It'll take me an hour," Chip said. "An hour and a half at most." "Is Julia here?" "No, she left. She said hello and left." "You broke up?" "I don't know. She's gotten herself medicated, and I don't even trust." Wait a minute. Are you wanting to go to Eden's or chasing Julia?" Chip touched the rivet in his left ear. 90% going to Eden's." "Oh, Chip." "No, but listen," he said. "She's using the word health like it has some kind of absolute timeless meaning. This is Julia? She takes pills for 3 months. The pills make her unbelievably obtuse, and the obtuseness then defines itself as mental health. It's like blindness defining itself as vision. Now that I'm blind, I can see there's nothing to see." Denise sighed and let her shoulders drop. "What are you saying? You want to follow her and take away her medicine?" "I'm saying the structure of the entire culture is flawed," Chip said. "I'm saying the bureaucracy has arrogated the right to define certain states of mind as diseased. A lack of desire to spend money becomes a symptom of disease, which requires expensive medication, which medication then destroys the libido. In other words, destroys the appetite for the one pleasure in life that's free, which means the person has to spend even more money on compensatory pleasures. The very definition of mental health is the ability to participate in the consumer economy. When you buy into therapy, you're buying into buying. And I'm saying that I personally am losing the battle with a commercialized, medicalized, totalitarian modernity right this instant. Denise closed one eye and opened the other very wide. If I grant that these are interesting issues, she said, will you stop talking about them and come upstairs with me? Chip shook his head. There's a poached salmon in the fridge, a creme fraiche with sorrel. Has it occurred to you that Dad is sick? An hour is all it's going to take, hour and a half at most. I said, has it occurred to you that Dad is sick? Chip had a vision of his father trembling and pleading in the doorway, and to block it out, he tried to summon up an image of sex with Julia, with the azure-haired stranger, with Ruthie, with anyone, but all he could picture was a vengeful, fury-like horde of disembodied breasts. The faster I find Eden and make those corrections, he said, the sooner I'll be back, if you really want to help me. An available cab was coming down the street. He made the mistake of looking at it, and Denise misunderstood him. I can't give you any more money, she said. He recoiled, as if she'd spat on him. Jesus, Denise. I'd like to, but I can't. I wasn't asking you for money. Because where does it end? He turned on his heel and walked into the downpour and marched toward University Place, smiling with rage. He was ankle deep in a boiling gray sidewalk-shaped lake. He was clutching Denise's umbrella in his fist without opening it, and still it seemed unfair to him. It seemed not his fault that he was getting drenched. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more recorded content.